Welcome to Chapter 16. Chapter 16, we're going to be talking a little bit about just how awful humans can really be in regards to the health of our planet. Now, when you think about humans and the health of our planet, you probably realize that we're a bunch of slobs, really, at least relative to all of the other living things that inhabit our planet now or previously. So, with that comes natural resources. Now, what you may not know about natural resources is that they are things that are used primarily for energy. So like electricity or movement by locomotion, like a car or a train or a helicopter or an airplane or something of that line. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the first part, and then we're going to be talking about kind of how we abuse these items. As we proceed, on your handout, you're going to notice that everything that appears on my screen is also going to appear on yours. And off to the right of your paper, there's a bunch of lines where you can add in information. Now, as we go through, there's going to be a bunch of questions that are posed to us. And as I discuss those items, I'm going to also type them onto the screen so that you can get that information copied down onto your paper, either using the slide or those lines off to the right. So, our first topic is natural resources, specifically global resources. Global resources come in one of two types. There's renewable resources, and there's non-renewable resources. So our first question is, what's the difference between renewable and non-renewable? I want you to stop and I want you to think about that for a moment. Renewable means that essentially it's something that can be recycled. So renewable, it can be recycled, and if something's recycled, what does that mean? Well, it means that it can be reused, right? So renewable resources can be reused. What do you think that means in regards to non-renewable resources? Well, if renewable can be reused, then non-renewable cannot be reused. So non-renewable cannot be reused. And if something cannot be reused, what does that mean about the supply of that item? Well, it means that the supply, it's not endless. There is a limit to the amount of that particular resource. So non-renewable cannot be reused because there is not an endless supply. And our next question, can you give examples of each? Can you give an example of something that we have that we use for energy that can be reused? Now I'm talking about sources of energy here. So where does our energy come from? That's what we need to start thinking about now. Where does our electricity come from? Where does our energy to move a car come from, or a plane, or a lawnmower? Where do those things come from? What are the sources of those energies? Well, in cars, we have oil, right? Gasoline, that's oil. And that is a non-renewable resource. Non-renewable. Oil is one. Another type of non-renewable resource, often used, well, back in the day, often used in trains, was coal. Both of these items are fossil fuels, which means that they were formed from fossils. And what's very important about where we're going with our discussion is what we need to know about fossil fuels is they contain carbon. That's what we need to know. Renewable. what are some sources of energy that are renewable? Well, if you've driven down 51st Avenue, maybe it's 43rd Avenue, past ASU West, what do you see? A bunch of solar panels, right? What are the solar panels collecting? Sunlight. So sunlight gives us energy. That's renewable. The amount of sunlight we have, there's a lot of it, right? We're never going to use up all the sun in our lifetimes. So sunlight is renewable. If you've ever been to Nevada, you probably have driven over the Hoover Dam. What does that Hoover Dam really do? Is it used to just make a lake? No. We use water to generate electricity as well. And the last thing that we use as a renewable resource, if you've ever been going into California, or if you've driven through New Mexico, you've come across those big wind towers, right? So wind can also be used to generate electricity. All three of those are renewable resources. And we see those right here. We have those wind turbines collecting wind, which can then be used for energy. This isn't the Hoover Dam, but this is this thing like the Hoover Dam, where it's using the movement of water to generate electricity. And we have solar panels on the house. So what are renewable resources? We kind of just talked about this one. Renewable resources, they are used to collect energy. And they can be reused. How do we use renewable resources? Bottom line, as we've discussed, energy. So what about those non-renewable resources, like oil and coal? What are non-renewable resources? Things that will be used up. We'll end up using up all of the oil on our planet at some point. At the rate we were going about 5 to 10 years ago, how much oil we were using, we were going to run out of oil in about 50 to 70 years. We've slowed down on how much oil we've been using, but at the time, that was almost a crisis with how much oil we were really using. And if you think about it, what we're doing here in the United States, at least, is we're driving these huge gas guzzler vehicles, because the bigger the vehicle, the better you are, right? So people were driving around like Hummers, and it wasn't uncommon to see people driving those large vehicles, and those burn up a ton of gasoline, and oil's the primary product in gasoline. So they will be used up at some point. We've slowed down on how much we've been using, but we're still going to use it all at some point. And what do we use these for? Well, we've discussed this one as well. We use these primarily for energy. So, why do we need to be concerned about with how much oil or how much coal or how much even renewable resources we're using? Well, we need to be concerned about these for a few reasons. First, the population of our planet is increasing. And with each person that's added to our planet, the demand for more energy increases. We need more energy. Every person needs some form of energy. We also need to be concerned about these resources for another thing over here called the ecological footprint, also known as the carbon footprint. We'll talk about that shortly. And lastly, global warming, and we'll talk about that as well. So these are three reasons why we need to be concerned about our resources, both renewable and non-renewable. So recently we were talking about exponential growth and logistic growth of populations, and we talked about how the human population on our planet is growing exponentially, as illustrated by this graph. Now this graph is going out into the year 2050, so this is based on a little bit of predictions, but we can see just how quickly the human population has grown. And the year 1950, which wasn't really all that long ago, there's still cars from 1950 that people are driving on the roads today. There was, it looks like, about 3 billion people on our planet and now there's almost 7 or 8 billion people. So there's a ton of people on our planet. It's growing really fast. What are some potential concerns that we need to be worried about regarding not necessarily people and resources, but people and energy and people and waste? That's what we're talking about right now. Well, some concerns that we need to be aware of include: where will all of these people get their energy? Where will all those people get their energy? Now, you might just think, well, just plug in your charger and you can charge whatever you need to, right? Well, that's not necessarily the case all over the planet. There are parts of our planet where they do not get electricity. So what do they use for energy? Well, they use a lot of those non-renewable resources, which can be problematic because non-renewable resources, they're not clean. Even some of our renewable resources, when we use that energy, it's not clean. So, another concern, more people means more energy is needed, which means more waste is created. Now, when we're talking about waste from energy, what is that waste? Well, the waste is carbon dioxide. The waste is CO2. So carbon dioxide seems harmless. It's in our atmosphere. Plants take it in for photosynthesis. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is measured right here in what is called a carbon footprint. Carbon footprints measure how much carbon individuals use, or how much carbon dioxide individuals put off into the atmosphere. So what is it? A measure of how much CO2 people emit into the atmosphere. CO2, it is a waste product. It is a waste product. How is it measured? It's measured by taking samples of air. And we can take samples of air from all over the planet, high in the sky or near the surface of our planet. And we can also take samples from ice ages. How can we get samples from ice ages? Well, there's carbon locked up in all that ice. And by measuring how much carbon is in the ice from glaciers a million years ago, 500 million years ago, we can get a very good idea of how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere at that particular time. And this is because most of the oxygen and carbon dioxide that are on our planet are stored in water. Water became ice. So we can figure out how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere 50 million years ago by looking at ice. Kind of strange, but we can do it. So, how bad are we exactly? Now, when I say we, I'm talking about in terms of our planet. And we are the worst. As United States citizens, you really can't get any worse than we currently are. And we have just a little bit more to go, and we'll pick up with where we're leaving off right here in the next video.